Good morning, friends, and welcome to our second annual Champions for Education Breakfast. My name is Jim Barshop, and I'm the Chief Development Officer with Restore Education. Because this event is virtual, we've created what we hope will be a powerful policy forum that will do more than make you feel inspired when it's done. Our clear goal is to encourage specific actions after the event is over that we can all take to scale equity opportunities for those in our community who need it the most. What different and additional actions can we take to more effectively address the challenges of poverty and educational inequity in San Antonio? Audience members will be able to ask questions of our panelists in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screens. As a program announcement, we were informed recently that Paula Gold-Williams will not be able to participate on the panel due to her other responsibilities with CPS Energy relating to the weather events of last week. I want to thank you all for being here and especially acknowledge our event sponsors who made this free event possible. To our partner sponsors, San Antonio College, Valero Energy Foundation, the NRP Group, Texas A&M University San Antonio, 4M Realty, CPS Energy, Broadway Bank, and Elsa Barshop, thank you for your generosity and involvement. To our ally sponsors, SWBC PEO, City of San Antonio Department of Human Services, VIA, San Antonio Housing Authority, Beneficent Financial, Rick Jimenez, Dawn Green, and Patty Benitez, thank you. Our friends sponsors, including SA Works, are on the screen as well below, and you are very much all appreciated. We're also thankful for our media partners, KSAT 12, Texas Public Radio, and the San Antonio Report. This webinar is being simulcast on ksat.com and will also be available after the event on their website. Our event is co-hosted by the San Antonio Chamber of Commerce and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Offering her welcome, here is Marina Gonzalez, President and CEO of the Hispanic Chamber.
Buenos días, amigas y amigos. My name is Marina Gonzalez, and I'm the President and CEO of the San Antonio Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to the Champions for Education virtual breakfast hosted by our friends at Restore Education. Our Hispanic Chamber is proud to co-host today's event and support this important discussion on how we can work together to remove the educational barriers and ensure the next generation of workforce for San Antonio. Thank you for having us today, and we hope that you enjoy today's conversation.
I'll introduce our San Antonio Chamber of Commerce co-host in just a few moments. But first, the Board of Directors at Restore Education has worked diligently this past year and helped to achieve record results for our nonprofit. We are very blessed to have their passion, foresight, and active engagement to help achieve our mission. Now, I'd like to gratefully introduce our board chair, Mr. Rick Jimenez.
Good morning. On behalf of the Board of Directors of Restore Education, I want to extend a warm welcome and thank you all for joining us today. This well-attended event is a testament to the interest and willingness from local community members and leaders such as yourself to continue to work toward solutions to some of our city's biggest problems, namely poverty and educational inequity. San Antonio voters and policymakers have recently reinforced educational advancement and workforce development as the first crucial step to help underserved residents along a pathway toward economic mobility and family stability. Restore Education is a proud partner in that effort. We know that learning English, achieving a GED, preparing for college, and/or completing a workforce credential are important steps that lead to employment opportunities and increased wages. We also know that the services we provide are critical to improving the skill level of our local workforce and strengthening our overall economy. And I'm sure you would agree, that's why we're all here today. Restore Education is proud to partner with so many great organizations in our community that have such a strong collective impact. The agencies you see are critical to our mission and are integral in helping us effectively meet student needs, remove barriers, and support student goal achievement. We'd really like to thank all of our partnerships, and we greatly appreciate them. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to Restore Education's co-founder and executive director, an incredibly driven and hardworking nonprofit professional, Ms. Kelly Rhodes.
Good morning. I'd like to start by echoing Rick's sentiments and thanking each of you for choosing to attend our second annual Champions for Education Breakfast. I'm particularly grateful to our board, event sponsors, community partners, renowned panelists, staff, and the students who have made today's discussion possible. When I spoke to you last year at our inaugural breakfast, San Antonio had just released its 2019 Status of Poverty report. You may recall the report indicated that among the most populous metropolitan areas in the United States, San Antonio was ranked highest for poverty. At the time, we knew that to lift our neighbors out of poverty and to compete with other cities economically, action to increase educational attainment would be required at all levels: governmental policies, organizational commitments, corporate involvement, and personal engagement. Yet, we could not have foreseen the increased educational inequity, sustained job loss, or new barriers to employment for our lower skilled community members that would surface in the year ahead as a result of the pandemic. The actions required of us today are much bolder and even more necessary than we imagined. Without a high school or post-secondary credential, thousands of our neighbors have long struggled to overcome significant barriers to furthering their education, such as food insecurity, limited access to transportation, childcare, healthcare, and technology, unstable housing, domestic violence, and racial inequities. Now, they are bearing the brunt of the COVID-19 crisis, exacerbating each of these challenges. As the economy has shifted, automation has increased, and industries employing adults with low skills have been disproportionately affected, San Antonio residents without a high school credential are more in danger than ever of being left even further behind. And our city cannot afford to leave these individuals out of our economic recovery. Imagine trying to obtain employment, pay your bills, sign up for assistance, or even to apply to a workforce training program with a middle school reading level and limited computer access. This is the situation in which many of our community members and the majority of our students find themselves. Yet, despite these barriers, over 2,500 of our neighbors took a critical first step toward reconnecting with education and achieving lasting stability by applying to our program. Overwhelmingly, more than 65% entered our program with a reading level between the 4th and the 8th grade. We believe that post-secondary success is for everyone, even and especially these most vulnerable neighbors. My father, an engineer turned educator who founded Restore Education in 2008, held the strong belief that flexible pathways lead to success for each student. In other words, students don't fit us. Rather, our staff work to help remove barriers and meet individual needs so that students can progress along a continuum of services, from basic literacy to workforce training to college guidance and support. Today, this has never been more true. Shortly after last year's breakfast, our Learning Center was forced to close. And just like that, many of our students suddenly lost an educational safe haven and their primary access to reliable computers. Our team made the clear choice to revamp our entire curriculum, bringing instruction online in a highly personalized manner. Today, our instructors are not only delivering individualized tutoring and connections to emergency resources, but they're also helping students to navigate new technology and prepare for new types of careers. They've even walked students through connecting to the internet for the very first time. And I could not be more proud of the many dauntless actions they continue to take. But this work cannot be done by staff alone. Generous donors, partner agencies, and volunteers are all critical to the success of each student. At this moment, we have a tremendous opportunity to break through generational poverty and position our great city for the future. We have more students than ever before ready to take that first step on their educational journey, but we need your help to make their dreams a reality. I'd now like to turn it over to Brenda, a graduate of our program and a true testament to the transformation that adult education provides our community, one student at a time.
Hi, my name is Brenda Fuentes, and I'm glad to be here today. I began my path with Restore Education in 2009 on the dual track of getting my high school diploma while I started college. I finished college in 2012 and worked with other low-income women to help them graduate it. I was also in the United Way committee to give childcare scholarships so individuals could go to college just like I did. In 2020, I got my master's in education and I began teaching as a 7th grade AP science teacher at Idea Public Schools. In this video that you're about to see, you'll hear more of my story. But while it's playing, you will have an opportunity to participate in a text to give fundraising challenge. Several generous donors have agreed to match all gifts this morning, up to $5,000. So for every dollar you donate, this match will double your impact. Your support today will directly benefit the next group of students that walk through the doors of Restore Education in the coming months. Please give generously and thank you.
So I dropped out at a really young age. When I was in school, in high school, I was absent a lot. My mom was really sick. She passed away, so I dropped out when I was 17. And then I became a single mom. By the time I turned 20, I was like, where can I go and get my GED? I'm already old, until I came and found Restore. I proceeded with getting my GED and then getting my high school diploma, and it didn't stop there. I was like, I want to keep moving forward, and they really helped me, the transition.
In San Antonio, 1 in 5 people struggle against poverty. While the cases of this are varied, we've seen firsthand how education transforms lives. Adults without a high school diploma or GED are 3.5 times more likely to experience poverty. Right now, 65% of jobs in Texas require post-secondary training or education. This is an immense obstacle for the more than 800,000 San Antonians who have no education beyond high school. As our city looks to the future, we must confront these economic and educational challenges that so many of our neighborhoods face. Together, we can lift these barriers and create pathways to prosperity, empowering one another to learn, grow, and achieve. Because everyone should enjoy a bright future. And the foundation of that future is a good education. This is why Restore Education provides innovative, no-cost pathways to education for all San Antonians. Every day, we help students earn their high school equivalency, prepare for college, and train for in-demand careers, all with the goal of helping our students and their families thrive. This work is reshaping the future of San Antonio, one student at a time.
And thank God I did come into finding Restore Education, because my life wouldn't be where I'm at right now. I wouldn't be a teacher. I wouldn't have my master's. I wouldn't have any of that. There's so many parents out there that just think that after 18, you're already at that gap. They don't know that there's still assistance. I would definitely like to thank Restore Education and even other donors, because without it, again, I wouldn't be here where I am today.
In the last 5 years, the number of students we serve has more than quadrupled. Restore Education students have the highest GED graduation rates in Bexar County. Over 80% of students in our workforce training programs attain their certification and employment within a year.
Our programs play a vital role in creating opportunity and stability for individuals, young and old, who are eager to work hard to transform their lives.
Education is the key.
We need your support to help make their dreams a reality.
Thank you for the opportunity to learn and grow.
Thank you for the opportunity to build a better tomorrow for me, for my family, for our community.
With Kelly and Carrie, it didn't stop at just getting my associates. You know, they helped me get into Texas A&M. They helped me with my FAFSA. They helped me get my first job. They gave me interview questions. So it doesn't just stop at education. They set you up for success. They set you up for a career. They set you up for job placement. Carrie and Kelly helped me write my resumes. Without them, I wouldn't be where I'm at. Like, without them, I wouldn't be able to tell my kids, like, yes, mom dropped out, But I didn't stop there. I fell and I got back up, and I got back up with their help.
What? Oh, it's my turn again. Oh, I'm texting 44321 Champions 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, you can text to give through the remainder of this event, and we will announce the results near the end. Text Champions 2021 to 44321. All right, let's get on with our program. We have a distinguished panel here today to talk about the bold actions we must all take as a city to eliminate education inequities and workforce barriers. We are honored to have as our moderator, Richard Perez, President and CEO of our co-host, the San Antonio Chamber of Commerce. Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm extremely proud to join you today in representing our 1,850 different business members. It's an important discussion that you've just heard and seen firsthand. An example, Brenda Jimenez and the things that are happening at Restore Education. It's important, and I am hopeful that this discussion today will continue to further that momentum going forward. You know, years ago, during a dark time for England, Winston Churchill said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." Well, our country has definitely been dealing with a crisis over the past many months, but here in San Antonio, we will not let it go to waste. Our community is turning this crisis into an opportunity to think and act differently regarding workforce development. Thankfully, we are a step ahead of many other communities because we have wisely already begun to dedicate real financial support to these efforts. Today's conversation will surely help us move forward and double down on these important efforts. We are pleased to partner with the top-notch Restore Education team who has been working to reconnect individuals across our community with educational opportunities through one-on-one interventions. I can personally testify to the success of such a model because I may not be standing before you today without the personal connection of a caring school counselor who made sure I understood all the opportunities available to me and helped me access those wonderful supports. I am also honored to help share the insights of our excellent speakers today, so let's get started. Our keynote panelist today is Dr. John Friedman, a professor of economics and international and public affairs at Brown University. Dr. Friedman is a founding co-director of Opportunity Insights at Harvard University. His research brings together theory and data, harnessing the power of large administrative data sets to yield policy-relevant insights on a wide range of topics, including taxation, healthcare, and education quality. He has appeared in top academic journals as well as in major media outlets. Dr. Friedman has also worked as special assistant to the president for economic policy at the National Economic Council in the White House from 2013 to 2014. He holds a PhD in economics, an MA in statistics, and a BA in economics, all from Harvard University. He is a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research and is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Public Economics. I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Friedman as our kickoff panelist. He's got a lot of good things to talk about. And so, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I will introduce Dr. Friedman. Dr. Friedman, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much for that really generous introduction. It's so wonderful to be with you all here this morning to talk about this important issue. Let me just share my screen. Richard, can you confirm, is this coming through? Perfect. So what I want to do is kind of take a step back a little bit and think about why it is so important that we come at this problem of inequality and upward mobility through the lens of education, exactly the way everyone has been discussing this morning, and which is so much a part of Restore's mission. And to do that, I want to start at kind of the broadest level and think about the American dream. So this means many different things to many different people, but one way to think about it is that through hard work, everyone has the chance to grow up and kind of live a life that is fulfilling and have a higher standard of living than their parents did. And this is something that we can actually measure in data. We've done this in this graph. And what's really striking is the way that it appears the American dream in this sense has faded over time. So if you ask this question for children born in 1940, so that's like my parents, that's the dot over here on the left of the screen. More than 90% of children born in 1940 grew up to have a higher standard of living than their parents did. And in fact, that was so prevalent in that era, people sometimes talked about doubling standard of living from one generation to the next. But as you see, as we move to the right, that's fallen over time, so that by the time you get to 1980, when I was born, it's literally no better than a coin flip whether children in this country will grow up to have a higher standard of living than their parents did. And you ask why this is the case, it's mostly because of the relatively imbalanced growth that we've had in this country over the last 40 or 50 years. GDP has tripled, and yet the median wage has gone up only a little bit. And that stagnation has driven what I think has been not just an economic problem, but a social and a political problem that drives so much of the frustration that we feel. So what I want to do this morning is, think about what can we do to restore the American dream? And, spoiler alert, like it's going to involve education. And I think that's going to be so much of an important feature of driving not only success in this way at an individual level, but also at a community level. And I'm going to talk about not just some of the broader themes, but why programs like Restore and community colleges more generally can play such an important role in that. So the first thing that we can do with the data, and we're going to try to kind of pull this apart in different ways to understand not just how this phenomenon exists at a national level, but how it differs and how the challenges that we face are often different from place to place, even from neighborhood to neighborhood within cities. So the first thing to realize is that these failings in the American dream are not something that are uniform across the United States. So this is a heat map asking a very similar question. It takes children born to families in poverty across the US, and it asks how well those kids did when they grew up, measuring earnings in their 30s. Each of the little polygons that you see that's colored on this map is a city, and the color tells you kind of how well these kids are doing, right? So everyone was kind of born in a similar economic situation, but in some of these blue areas, like Dubuque, for instance, and many other areas in the upper Midwest, kids actually did relatively well on average by their mid-30s. But in other areas like Charlotte in the Southeast and other cities here that are much more red, kids are not even on average getting back to where their parents were. And you see San Antonio down here. San Antonio is kind of in the middle of this distribution. But we can do even better, and we can zoom into San Antonio with this approach. And instead of looking at how these differences in upward mobility look from city to city or region to region across the US, we can even do that from neighborhood to neighborhood in the San Antonio area. So now each of the little polygons is a census tract. And I think the thing that surprises me every single time I look at these maps is that I've not changed the color scale. So you see that same blue to red contrast in San Antonio. That is the same differences between the upper Midwest and the Southeast that, I think are still quite shocking that exist in this country as a whole, but at least are, 1,000 miles apart. Here you see some of those same contrasts within neighborhoods that are miles apart in the same metro area. And San Antonio is not special in this way in the US. This is something that you see in every city and every community, these types of differences. Now, just to remind you, these colors really show based on where kids grew up. So this is not about where people live now. This is about where people grew up. It's about mapping the childhood roots of inequality and upward mobility. And the reason why I think that difference is so important is it highlights the importance of education and child development as opposed to thinking only about economic growth. And in fact, if you ask what are characteristics of high mobility neighborhoods? What are the types of places that really put children on a trajectory for success? What you find are characteristics like lower poverty rates. But again, it's more about, we're looking at all kids who come from poverty. It's about the other families in the community. It's about more stable family structures. Again, this is about other families. Like, is this a community in which kind of two-parent families versus one-parent families are the norm? Greater social capital. Are communities connected with each other? Are children not just connected with other children, but are they connected with children across socioeconomic divides? And education quality is the final very important characteristic. All of this, I think, collectively points to an approach to upward mobility that's really focusing not just on single moments throughout a child's life. The evidence does not support these views that, if we don't get to it by age 5, it's all over, or all that matters is what happens at the end of high school and the transition to college or career. What it really suggests is that kind of every year, for the first 20, 25 years of someone's life is an incredibly important moment where their trajectory can be turned for the better. And of course, the supports that you're going to want to give children who are 3 are going to be very different than the supports you're going to want to give young adults who are 23. But the focus is the same. The focus is all around developing human capital, developing social capital, to give students and young people the ability to go out into the labor force and get jobs that will lead to an economically secure future. What you actually see, I think, that's quite interesting is that if you have economic growth without these particular foundations, that in fact does not lead to upward mobility. And I think some of those very red cities in the Southeast, like Charlotte and Atlanta, they're an example of exactly how this can happen. Those cities, as you know, are just booming economically over the past 25, 30 years. They've been the economic engines of the Southeast, creating an incredible number of new jobs, high-paying jobs, jobs for people from all across and all levels of education. But if you look at the outcomes of children who grew up in poverty in those communities, they're not getting those jobs because they, along the way, did not develop the human and social capital that was needed to get those jobs. And so what are those companies doing? They're importing people from outside the city. People are moving to Charlotte and taking those good jobs. They're not, the benefits of development are not flowing to those locally. And so I think you really need a combination of both economic growth and these types of supports around education and childhood development. Now, I'm going to focus on college and career readiness for the rest of my talk this morning, kind of given the particular focus of Restore. And the way I'm going to do this is think about this through colleges and universities, although you can think about job training programs in a very similar way. I'm going to use the data to break down the ways in which colleges and universities are promoting upward mobility into access and success, right? So access is whether a school is serving students from low-income populations. Is that a place that is accessible to students coming from those backgrounds? And then success, once a student gets to that school, do low-income students and attendees achieve economic security in the long run? And similar to the maps I showed you before, we can actually follow students over 2 decades to see where they're coming from, where they went to school, and then how they're doing afterwards to really get a sense of this without having to do projections or anything like that. And so just to give you an example, these data exist for actually really all the colleges in the country. I'm going to give you an example for the Alamo Colleges district, all the 5 schools together in San Antonio. So the first thing to look at is access. And what this shows is how students at the Alamo Colleges, where they're coming from across the socioeconomic distribution. So what you see here, each of the 5 bars corresponds to 1/5 of the parent income distribution nationally. And so what you see is that Alamo is actually doing a pretty good job of kind of making sure that students from low-income families have access. And then we can look at the success part of it. And, how are these students doing? And kind of just for symmetry, I'm kind of dividing things up into fifths in terms of student backgrounds. We can also do that in terms of outcomes and ask, where is it that these students end up? And in particular, I'm using a cutoff of about $60,000 in their mid-30s, which is the top fifth of the income distribution. You can do it using other thresholds. You get very, very similar results. So how do access and success look on this graph? Well, access is the height of that bar there. That's saying that about 22% of students at Alamo colleges come from low-income backgrounds. And about success is this dot right here. That's saying that 11% of those 22% of students end up reaching the top fifth of the income distribution. And now to come back to upward mobility, we kind of put those back together, and that's telling you something about the overall mobility rate. So that's 2.4%. How do you interpret that? It's what fraction of all students at Alamo colleges are kind of bottom to top success stories. And again, that's not saying that it's a failure if students don't quite end up in the top fifth. These things are very correlated across different measures of this, but this is one nice way that we can compare all the different community colleges and universities across the country. And in fact, Alamo colleges, there are some real outliers at the top here, but Alamo colleges is among the top community college systems in the country in terms of upward mobility. It's at about the 85th percentile of community colleges across the country, and it kind of giving you some other examples from other places. And it's well above the average for community colleges in the country. So what do the data then say about how we can continue to improve on this? Well, what's useful is we can kind of plot each school in kind of access versus success space. So here we've got access on the horizontal axis. We've got success on the vertical axis. And so Alamo colleges are right here. And then you can just, if each college is a dot, you can kind of compare where Alamo colleges are to all the other colleges in the US. And so all of the four-year schools are gray. All of the community colleges are in green. And so you see that, the reason that Alamo colleges is doing quite well in terms of upward mobility is primarily due to its kind of impressive level of access, right? It's kind of, you want to be up and to the right on this graph. And Alamo colleges is doing a pretty good job of being to the right relative to other colleges at a similar level of access. It's kind of in the middle in terms of success. And so again, just to like orient you on this graph, relative to other colleges or universities in San Antonio, you see that they kind of work up this graph. So here's UTSA and Trinity. UTSA is doing kind of, again, that's a quite high mobility school as that's kind of up and to the right. Trinity has very good outcomes for its students, but there are very few students from low-income backgrounds that attend. Only about 2% of students attending Trinity are from the same low-income background that account for 22% of students at Alamo colleges. How does Alamo compare to some of these other really successful community colleges? So here's just, I've plotted a couple examples. And again, community colleges also differ across this access and success dimensions. So for instance, you have a school like Nova, which is Northern Community colleges in Northern Virginia. Nova has excellent outcomes, but has relatively little access, with fewer than 10% of its students coming from low-income backgrounds. And South Texas College is kind of the exact opposite situation, where the outcomes aren't as good, but more than 40% of students are coming from low-income backgrounds. We can also, again, just do this looking at community colleges in Texas to get kind of even more of a local sense. So here is where Alamo colleges is. All of the green dots are all the community colleges in Texas. And so here again, you see a bunch of the same contrast. So Brazosport in the Houston metro area is there, which is again a very high mobility college by having excellent outcomes, but relatively low access. And here is El Paso, which is another very high access, but kind of lower success community college. And so again, kind of relative to these other dots, you see that Alamo is doing pretty well in terms of access. And so here, I think the data would suggest that kind of moving up in success is the key dimension on which it can improve. So that's making sure that students are taking programs that are geared towards the types of workforce openings that you all talked about earlier. Here's another example. You just see there's so much variation locally. Even looking in the Houston metro area, you see the same contrast between places like Galveston and Bravo Sport. You also see places like Alvin and Blinn, which are just kind of dominated in the sense that they both have relatively low access and relatively low success. And so I think that there's just a tremendous amount of learning that can be done by using these data to figure out what schools are excelling in what places, right? I'm guessing that Alamo colleges could learn quite a bit from Brazosport on success, but Alamo colleges are going to teach Brazosport quite something about access. Let me take a step back just to close this. And I want to really hit the same note that Richard hit earlier, which is that we should really never let a crisis go to waste. And in this case, I think we can't let a crisis go to waste, because this recession, more so than any other, is exacerbating the inequality that we are already so concerned about in this country and in San Antonio. There's been a lot written about the economic inequality and how so much of the remaining unemployment exists for low-income families. But what's also the case is that this recession has hit education in an incredibly unequal way. So this graph is a graph that I've put together with some of my colleagues, measuring how elementary school students are doing learning math. It tracks through a math app called Zern, which is used in classrooms as part of their weekly routine. And so what that allows you to do is get a sense of what the kind of the pre-COVID baseline was, and then see how schools responded after COVID hit. And what you see, of course, on average is exactly what you'd expect. Everything shut down mid-March, and there was a huge disruption last year, after which schools kind of got back a little bit used to the new environment and started doing better in terms of encouraging student learning. But you see enormous disparities. So while high and low income schools were doing very similarly before the pandemic, what you see is that high income schools responded much more quickly. So that even a month after the shutdown last spring, students were already basically back to baseline in terms of learning, and that picked right up again where it left off when students came back during this academic year in the fall and in the winter. That's not the case though for students at low income schools, where there was a much larger decline during the shutdown. Initially in March, there was some recovery, but it was really only partial. And even if you look in these data just in the last month or so, you see that there's still a pretty large gap in terms of the learning that's going on each week. And so I think this, this is, again, an incredible crisis in our country. And I think, the only possible silver lining is that sometimes it takes a crisis of this magnitude to, get people to come together to address, these enormous problems. And so just to come back to where I started, my hope is that we can use this crisis to really make some of the serious changes that we need in order to address this problem here. So I'm really delighted to get to chat about that with the other distinguished panelists this morning. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
All right, John, thank you so much. Dr. Friedman, thank you. Fantastic slides, a lot of really strong and important data that I think has got us all thinking about a whole bunch of different things. We appreciate the fact that you're going to stick around for a little bit to join us on the panel. And so I'm going to take a moment to introduce our panelists. But before then, I've gotten a couple of folks that have texted me. Will your slides be available to our attendees so that they can take them back and look at them maybe a little more closely at a future time?
Yes, yes, I will send the slides to you and to Jim, and you can distribute them or post them. So this is absolutely all public. Delighted to be helpful. And I think the other thing that I would note is that we have online resources. So if you want to look at maps of upward mobility, like I showed you for San Antonio, that's all freely available online at a website called the opportunityatlas.org. and all the stuff about COVID and how that's affecting inequality, that's at a website called tracktherecovery.org.
Okay, well, we're taping this, and so we'll make sure that we send a link out later today to all the folks that are attending. And then when you send this the slide deck, we'll attach that, and maybe we'll attach those websites as well. Thank you. It's exciting, and very, very interesting information. So let me introduce our other two special guests. We have with us today Anson Green. He's the senior manager of economic opportunity with Tyson Foods. He is a workforce education and training trailblazer whose passion is deploying innovative service models for low and middle skilled workers to support their life ambitions. He led the transformation of the over $80 million Texas Federal Adult Education Program at the Texas Workforce Commission, and he turned it into a solution for Texans seeking responsive education and training services to meet their college and career aspirations. And Anson is the 2020 National Adult Education Administrator of the Year. Anson, thank you for joining us. We're extremely excited to have you. We are also joined today by Romanita Mata Barrera, and she is, of course, the Executive Director of SA Works, which is the workforce development arm of the Chamber's sister agency, the San Antonio Economic Development Foundation. She leads efforts to align education, workforce, economic development, and policymakers to meet the talent needs of our city's current and future employers. Her career spans workforce development, education policy, and media relations. She has worked for Set of Jobs for Progress, served as Deputy Director of the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanic Americans, and has also served as Director of Hispanic Outreach and Communications at the U.S. Department of Education. Romanita, it's great to see you. Welcome. All right, well, let's get started. We've received questions ahead of time, and we're also getting questions even as we speak. So let's get right into it. And Dr. Friedman, why don't I start with you? The pandemic and its devastating effects has laid bare the issue of equity as a national topic. As San Antonio works to recover from the pandemic and address unemployment and underemployment in our community, what policy recommendations would you suggest as opportunities to help us ensure equity?
So I think the most important thing in the short to medium term is to recognize that this is a recession which has been caused by a global pandemic. Now, that sounds obvious, but what that means from an economic policy perspective is that the best economic policy we can have is to get the public health situation under control. The fact of the matter is that overall economic activity at this point is actually not that far below where it was this time last year. So the pandemic is really not having its primary effect in terms of reducing overall economic activity. The problem is that it's shifted economic activity away from small business, away from workplaces that are employing lower wage workers. It's had a particularly devastating effect on Black and Latino workers. And I think just trying to get people to spend more without fixing the public health situation is not going to fix the problem. So what we need to do is we need to fix the public health situation. We need to get people comfortable going back and shopping in stores. We need to get schools open in a way that everyone, teachers, students, administrators, parents, everyone feels comfortable. And in the meantime, we need to make sure that all of these families don't kind of sink under the weight of this crisis. And so I think in the short term, a combination of pushing to get the public health situation under control in various settings, along with support for families to make sure that they can put food on their table is so important. Then kind of once we actually are in a real recovery phase, I think it's very important to make sure that we get people back to work in ways that are not just make work jobs, that are not kind of dead end low wage jobs, but are jobs that are on a trajectory towards economic security. And I think that is so wrapped up in all of the training and education that Restore does. But I think we've seen this in so many different settings. Simply getting somebody any old job, obviously it's better than no job, but it's not going to be something that's going to put people on that trajectory. And what really where it starts is with education, whether that's GED high school or college, associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, or more workforce-oriented training programs. It's going to differ from circumstance to circumstance, but really giving people the training and education they need so that they can get and develop through a career path that's going to lead to economic security.
Excellent, excellent. So consumer confidence, being able to get folks ready to get back to work and back to school clearly is the priority of the day. So thank you for that. So Ramonita, let's turn to you. At SA Works, you collaborate with local employers. What are the most pressing needs you see a year into COVID, and what are employers telling you?
So thank you, Richard, for that. And I'll just echo what Dr. Friedman said and expand on that. The public health issue is critical. What we heard deep in the throes of COVID as well was for those employers who were still able to keep their operations open, they also saw so many of their employees having to take a leave of absence to care for individuals at home who had been impacted by COVID. And we see it still today that individuals may not have the luxury of working like most of us do on the Zoom call via Zoom, that they have to go into a job site and into a physical job site. And that has been severely impacted by the fact that students are not back at school. And that has certainly impacted females in particular as heads of households. And so we're very understanding of that. And I think our employer community and both yourself and Marina with the Hispanic Chamber and the San Antonio Chamber, I think we can proudly say that we have a community of committed business owners in San Antonio who are very solution driven. And so things that we have been hearing is just how they are wanting to really build that confidence to get people back to work. For those jobs that do require on-site work, it's to really emphasize that they have their employees' safety priority in mind, that they're taking all of the necessary measures. So I would say that first and foremost is that we do have to have confidence in, as well in our private sector, that they're wanting to do things right for our community. But just as importantly too, that we also have to be comprehensive of the fact that so many of our businesses, especially our small and mid-sized businesses, have also been impacted. Their operations, their production, the way they do business. And so in many ways, what they have shared with us also is that has impacted their ability to also project staffing needs and their ability to get people back on to the jobs. And so I think overall, the conversations that we're having in San Antonio that you're a part of, that Marina's a part of, that Restore Education, are really critical, because we need to have this, there's an interdependency between the private sector and then what these community-based organizations are doing. What I do see is an increased conversation around digital literacy and digital skills needs. And, this is something that we have been talking about in the manufacturing sector with high tech and automation coming, but it certainly has been accentuated now. And so I think that is something that's really critical for individuals to keep in mind, and for our community-based partners like Restore Education, who are providing these reskilling and upskilling opportunities.
Excellent. Very good. And what are you seeing from the employee side as you're placing these folks? What are they talking about? What's top of mind for them?
I think top of mind is health concerns. So to Dr. Friedman's point, right, I think what we did in the city of San Antonio, which I know we are all very proud of, the ballot initiative to invest significant funding in training and workforce recovery programs is critical, but that can't be absent of what we need from a federal and state level in terms of health policies, because again, we can't get schools open safely. And so that is a big detriment to parents actually being able to take advantage of some of the on-the-job training opportunities. What we have seen to date is a lot of the individuals who were immediately impacted were those individuals that were mentioned earlier in those low skill, low wage jobs. And those jobs, many of them are just not back. And so I am encouraged by the fact that these individuals are seeking training opportunities. And that is going to be really critical, because again, it's great to get them trained into something that's going to be a sustainable job versus just getting that back into their old job. So there's a real opportunity. We have a now or never moment now. And I'm encouraged to hear by our fellow training providers who are sharing that many of our individuals are choosing long-term training because they realize this is an opportunity to invest in their own upskilling.
Well, I think it all goes back to consumer confidence, right? If you've got an employee that's excited to get back to work and feel safe, and you've got, a business owner that's providing that, then, the consumer is going to come in and feel that much more confident about getting out and getting back into the flow of how things used to work. So very good. So thank you for that, Romanita. Anson, let's turn to you. You led the transformation of the Texas Adult Education and Literacy Program and spearheaded short-term integrated education and training statewide. What can you recommend we do here in San Antonio as we try to help individuals at all skill levels get back to work?
Well, I want to thank everybody for having me out this morning. Restore Education, I was reflecting today, I've worked with them for 10 years now when I directed services at the Westside Education and Training Center for Alamo Colleges. So it's a great group. Glad to be here today. My experience really comes from working in San Antonio through a variety of kind of disruptive economic environments. I started in 1995 teaching GED on the Labor Road during a welfare to work initiative. The Levi's layoff, the Great Recession, those are all things that taught me lessons when I went to the state about really how education and workforce training can be most responsive to helping those individuals that are unemployed or underemployed and helping the employer community. And I would really kind of lump it into three major areas. One is really the criticalness of the employer and labor market responsiveness. And then with that, the accelerated models for education and training. It's just paramount to get folks back into work as quickly as possible, but also give them the path that they can come back to education, because they will, but the sustainability of income and stuff is going to be paramount in folks' lives. And then really adequate screening and supportive services for those individuals. Each of these, I think we really need to focus on in the models. And I see the successful models across Texas when I was at the Workforce Commission, now at Tyson Foods, working in 60 different communities across 17 states. I really see these elements pop out as being the ones most important for successful models. Going back to the employer element, the active engagement of employers is often something that isn't taken seriously, I see, in models that are less effective. Right now, the labor market is going to be very dynamic for the next 2 years at least, and the data is lagging. The data is from 2 years ago or last year. And so the only way to really know what the labor market is doing is to actively engage with employers. And that has got to be the community's job. Someone has to have the job of really nurturing the employer relationships and the communications, and then communicating back to the other partners. Too often that job is left to the education entities to do, and they're not the most experts at that sometimes. And there are other folks in the community that have that expertise. But I think this nexus of communication with the employer groups is just instrumental. That leads to understanding where the labor market's going, job development opportunities, internships, guest speakers to come and talk to participants about where the jobs are, what the skills are. And it's just absolutely important and paramount to find out who in the community has that mission of bringing that message back to the training providers and back to the individuals that are in the programs, because they're the ones that really are trying to get back into the workforce and need to hear from employers first what these jobs require. Focus on the unemployed, but also the underemployed and those that are at risk of losing their jobs. We see that often as a group that gets left behind. And employers, that's a great way to get employers' attention, because most employers right now are worried about retaining their staff. They're not thinking about hiring new staff necessarily. But right now, where their worry is keeping the ones they have. And so sometimes for education and workforce development organizations, I would suggest that's the hook sometimes to build greater engagement with the employers. I mentioned the accelerated training models. That's just paramount. I think San Antonio having worked here my whole career. I still live in Live Oak here, even though I work for the world headquarters of Tyson up in Arkansas. But San Antonio's got such a great bench of history working through these efforts, some pretty big disruptions. And Alamo Colleges, the Adult Education Consortium led by Region 20, Restore, you've got the models, and it's about building those, building more learn and earn apprenticeship models and pre-apprenticeship models, I think is critical. Then my last point on screening and supportive services is just absolutely instrumental. Folks in San Antonio, there's high rates of individuals that have been justice involved. You need to find out the best jobs for those individuals to get reemployed in, because they may not be able to go back to their old jobs. But going into other jobs means you've got to make sure their background and their interests really match that job well. And that's screening up front. And then the supportive component through our community-based organizations like Project Quest, Family Services, Goodwill, provides really what it takes for the individual to participate and attend and succeed. And you heard the story of Brenda, the student speaker earlier, about how she had so much engagement from Restore and others to keep her in the program. And I think that is just absolutely instrumental.
Thank you, Anson. Well, we've got all the right folks on listening. Of course, Ramonita is a key partner, Restore Education. You talked about Project Quest, all the others. They're all on and they're listening. And it's just helping us to double down on the good work that we're doing. So thank you for that. Let's move on. John, let's go back to you. As you've heard several times, this past November, San Antonians voted to support a comprehensive workforce development program using an 1/8 of a cent sales tax. Please share your thoughts on some of the best practices regarding addressing poverty through workforce development efforts.
So yeah, I think it's all about developing human capital and social capital. What do I mean by that? Let me use an example of a really successful workforce training program that our research group has worked with a little bit, called Year Up. What they do, that I think there are kind of two things that they do among many, I'm sure, but two things that really stand out to me. The first thing is that they take a really holistic view of the training that they provide. It's not just about giving particular skills with computer training or other really, job-specific skills, but they really focus on a lot of broader things like, how to behave in a professional environment, what to do in a job interview, how do you dress, how do you, just greet people. These are things that are often, little barriers, but ones that can really stand between young adults and successful jobs. They even have a closet where you can borrow clothes for interviews, again, just to reduce the barriers. The second thing that they do, and this echoes what Ramonita and Anson discussed, is they work really hand in hand with employers in order to make sure that they are training these students on a path that's going towards not just a job that they will have in the short term. Everyone goes to they don't call it an internship. It's like a paid position, for 6 months at a company, but it's into a field where there's a lot of demand locally. And so, for instance, in Charlotte, they often work very closely with Bank of America to put students into programs that are going to lead to, quality assurance roles or other roles that, whether they literally stay in that exact position or not, it's something that's in demand locally. And there have been really great results where, looking even 3 or 4 years down the road, students who were in this program compared to students that were randomly not in the program, as like a kind of gold standard randomized controlled trial type study, it seems like there's really big earnings gains and big gains in economic success. And so, that's just one example, but I think, those are really core elements of any program to really focus on not so much just, giving any old training, but what does an individual really need in order to be able to get and keep a job that puts them on the trajectory towards economic security.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for that insight. Ramonita, let's go back to you. From your research and on-the-ground insight, what jobs or industries have continued to thrive during this difficult time? And what do you think the future holds for these jobs?
Certainly, Richard, and I'd like to just make some points around Anson's comments about, we need to identify an organization that can really support or engage directly with our employers. And as you know, that is the role that SA Works has now been directly involved in, with both in support of both the county and the city's workforce recovery programs, because to Anson's point and to Dr. Friedman's point, we can tap into MC level data, we can tap into third-party data, but the reality is it requires us having conversations with our local employers, and the chambers have been instrumental, and our trade organizations as well, like the San Antonio Manufacturing Association and others, in allowing us to have these employer collaboratives. I would say these safe spaces, these trusted spaces where we can really listen directly to employers, and they can share with us some of the angst that they're experiencing in their own operations, but also what they're anticipating in terms of their workforce needs as well. And I would have to say that we're facing an opportunity to really engage the conversation. And I believe Anson mentioned this earlier as well. In many ways, our workforce ecosystem has operated, or even our academic system has in a silo, and we're not directly communicating with employers. And the reality is that we really need to look at how do we take advantage of these workforce dollars and create demand-driven training programs that also have a variety of opportunities and accelerated learning, because our employers who are hiring today, and I'm happy to say that, to answer your question, Richard, like who's hiring, I think the fact that we have been very smart in San Antonio, this is through both public and private sector leadership, to have diversified sectors represented. We are not dependent on one single industry, but rather we have a robust aerospace and manufacturing industry, both automotive as well as food manufacturing. We have IT and we have cybersecurity, and we have a robust healthcare and bioscience sector also that's thriving. So all of those elements really help set us up, position us in San Antonio to have more opportunities for individuals. But what we're also hearing from some of those sectors, particularly manufacturing and the skilled trades, is there's still a struggle with the perception and interest of our community members to take on those jobs. Yet those are the jobs that are also, we have seen, are resilient. There's been a lot of movement in the residential construction industry, and certainly in manufacturing. And you know that you were a part of a lot of the great wins that we experienced here in San Antonio, bringing Navistar, bringing large employers. And so I would say also the importance here is to listen to what employers are telling us in terms of also setting realistic expectations. And that should be incorporated as part of that counseling, that skills assessment, that interest assessment, because we're facing some really tough moments where individuals may not have the ability to comfortably return to the jobs that they were in, maybe stable jobs, but they're going to have to venture into completely new jobs in a new sector, new physical environments as well. And so setting those realistic expectations, and that is why employer engagement is so critical, because via virtual job shadows or through those conversations, as Anson mentioned earlier, having employers come in and speak to our training providers is going to be really critical to get people on a trajectory of economic mobility beyond just a quick fix job that's going to get them to pay their immediate bills. And so this is going to be a long-term play, but employer engagement, employer voices are going to be critical. And what we're seeing is many of the conversations are similar to what we had pre-COVID is, I will train for the technical aspects. Just bring me someone who will stay on the job, who's flexible, who's resilient, especially in some of those jobs that require a little bit more physical demand. But we're also seeing a shift as well in those jobs to where, math literacy is really important, because so much technology is now being embedded into all of those jobs at entry level positions as well. And so I would say that's the criticality as well. And that's why programs like Restore and others are so important to get those individuals on a pathway to success and sustainable employment.
Excellent. Thank you, Romanita. Anson, why don't we move back on to you? Based on your experience with TWC and now at Tyson, what are you seeing nationally and locally that employers are doing to create upward mobility for their employees?
A great question. I think this is a really a huge issue, and I feel like I see a sea change happening with many employers where, and as I mentioned earlier, about just this investment on the front line, entry level, to keep those employees engaged, but also to help them evolve as the company evolves in technology, automation. And it's just really, really instructive to see those conversations happening. What I can tell you too is the employers don't have a lot of expertise sometimes working with the lower skilled population. And that's where the engagement with our public partners in adult education and workforce development are critical, because that's where the expertise lies. I've just started a national consortium of employers called Behind Every Employer. We have Walmart, Dollar General, Prologis, UniFirst, Merit Construction, and we're working on this issue of upskilling limited English and basic skilled employees within these Fortune 100, 500 companies. And really, what does that take? And I can share a little bit about the model we've had great success with at Tyson Foods. So we have programs in 60 locations in 17 states that are partnerships with our local adult education and workforce development partners. And so rather than try to feel like we can, figure all of that out from Springdale, Arkansas, we really go to where the expertise is and spend our energy coordinating and collaborating with local organizations that have this mission already. Restore Education, Region 20 Alamo Colleges, they have the mission to do this training and education. We work with them. We're doing it up in Seguin with Region 20 and Alamo Colleges to bring them into the plant to help us figure out how to take a workforce that we have that are loyal, tenured, but they lack basic skills. They lack the digital literacy that Romanita was just mentioning. Math is instrumental. And we really work to help customize something for that local community. I was just on a call last night at 11 o'clock at night with second and third shift workers in Portland, Indiana, who are Burmese speaking workers working in the operator role in our plant, which is a critical role in a very advanced manufacturing plant. But that's all about basic education. It's about English literacy. And for these workers, it was about basic numeracy. But we're making that investment, working with a local school up in Indiana. And I think that is where businesses are interested. They just don't know how. And this group I'm putting together nationally, that's really what it's all about, because I have the expertise in the public sector, working for 25 years in colleges and workforce development organizations in Texas. But now in the private sector, I feel like that's the value I can bring, is to say, like, how do we marry the workforce development public sector and education public sector with the private sector? Because the private sector really doesn't have a skill set sometimes when it comes to working with that frontline workforce.
Well said. I think it still is a challenge. And I know, Romanita, you're doing great work and your team, but there still is kind of that, how do me business X figure out how to do that when I have this? And there's so many resources, but I'm focused on cranking the workout, right? Keeping my employees safe and all that. So great point. John, let's go back to you. Distance learning, as you well know, and you touched upon it, is now the norm. What policies can be created to address the impacts that you talked about with distant learning for low-income students?
So we've used the education data that I showed you to identify schools that are serving low-income Black and Hispanic students, but are doing so in a way that really bucks the national trend and showing actually increases in digital engagement in the pandemic. And we asked them kind of what has been doing, what has been working for you? What seems to have been the secret sauce? And while, there's always some particular inspired individual who's just, going over the top, whether it's a teacher or, an academic coordinator to do this, I think there are a number of broad patterns that we see. And I actually think it's very similar to some of what we talked about in terms of the workforce development, but adapted for younger students, which is that schools have taken a much more holistic view of what is their role in the education process. Now, obviously, COVID has been kind of an unprecedented society level shock, but from the perspective of an individual student or an individual family, it's actually not that different from what many disadvantaged students face every year, where there's a family member who loses a job or gets sick or maybe goes to prison. And dealing with those type of disruptions, making sure that the child is kind of safe and secure in their home, making sure that they have food so that they're not hungry at school, making sure that they're able to kind of come to school and focus on learning. I think these are actually quite related to how one makes sure you have a digital connection or materials to learn remotely. And so, a number of these schools that have had this broader outlook for a long time, I think are the ones that have been particularly successful over the last 11 months in making sure that learning persists, and also making sure that students actually are learning, not just logging in on Google Meet or whatever. The data that I showed you, what I like about it so much is that it's not just about who logs in, it's about who's actually completing various lessons. And the way this particular program is structured is that you basically have to get to 100% on any given lesson before you can move on. And some students do it faster, some students do it slower, but that when you get to the end, they've actually paid attention and learned it. That's something that I think is important, to measure actually what you want to measure. That's important in research. It's also important in schools. And so schools that are taking a more analytic approach really to measuring everything that's going on, keeping track of where students are, providing support to teachers so that teachers can focus just on getting in contact with students and supporting them, and then there's support for doing these type of analytics. I think that's another very important piece as well for these schools, and I'm guessing that's again a very important part of these workforce programs as well.
So then it's just not about broadband, although I'm certain broadband is an issue. Certainly it is an issue in San Antonio, but it's about that engagement. And it sounds to me like being able to equip a teacher, professor, educator with the tools to be able to have the, kind of the bells and whistles when they see human or social capital development issues with those students, to be able to plug them in to those resources and keep them focused then on, that can be taken care of, and then keep them focused on the learning piece.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, again, broadband has been incredibly important. I don't think that it's something you can think of, oh, well, once we take care of broadband, then it's all going to be okay, right? Broadband is a problem, but schools that have kind of an all of the above, we need to not just, focus on teaching students how to add numbers, but we need to focus on creating an environment in which they will be able to focus on learning, whether that's broadband or food security or housing security or whatever it is. Taking that broad perspective for what it takes to create a learning environment, I think has always been important, but it's become particularly salient over the last 11 months.
Excellent. Well, I've been married to an educator for the last 30 plus years, and social work is definitely a part of the unwritten job description, right? So very good. Thank you. So I'm going to throw this next question open to anybody. Let's just shift the discussion a little bit. The question is, how do we create an entrepreneurial mindset in our community, and what supports are needed given our large population of low-income residents without a high school or post-secondary certification? So just the whole entrepreneurial mindset. What are y'all's thoughts? And again, I'll open it to any one of you three.
I would say the entrepreneurial mindset is absolutely critical, actually, to success. And what is instrumental behind that is a culture within the community, within the organizations, within the public, that some risk taking is okay, and that there's not going to be an answer to everything. Entrepreneurs run out there first and they try things out. they use as much great information as they have, but they're good with going out with 45, 50, 60% of their knowledge in terms of data or whatever to build something. But there is a tolerance also that might need to be retooled, that might have to have a mid-course correction. And sometimes you don't see that. I mean, that's where I saw working in the public sector for the state and even in San Antonio, people get haunted by performance measures. They get haunted by those accountability pieces, and that's important. But it also is a governor for maybe the innovation that you need. I look back at what we've done in San Antonio during these big crises. I mean, we've had some big ones in San Antonio from the closing of Kelly in the 90s, all the way to, things today. It was the risk taking that helped us do things. It was the risk taking and the tolerance across the public partner leadership in San Antonio, across the agencies, the chambers, the employer community. But that's where you got the maverick work that happens. And I think that's just instrumental in fostering an entrepreneurial go-get-'em mindset when it comes to economic and workforce development.
Excellent. Juanita, John, any thoughts on entrepreneurship and the mindset?
And Anson just captured that beautifully. And I think, and this, Richard, because you lead an organization that has, incredible small businesses, as does the Hispanic Chamber. And you see individuals that may even have limited English proficiency, but they own their own restaurants, they own their own stores. And so it's that spirit of innovation and that ability to not take no for an answer, and they're solutions driven, right? They see a problem, a gap, and so I think we need to continue to also just feed that entrepreneurialism. And I think and even the reskilling or the upskilling opportunity, because we know a lot of our small businesses were impacted because they didn't have the infrastructure that larger businesses had, even just to go e-commerce, take their services or products e-commerce. And so I think what the city put together through help and partnership of the chambers was like, let's not kill that entrepreneurial spirit. Let's just help support them and give them the skills to continue to be successful, but into a new era where they may be required to just pivot some of their work. But I think I'm so encouraged by our entrepreneurial community here in San Antonio. And I believe that, both public and private sector and mentorship from other businesses, others, large businesses, is critical to continue to see our small businesses thrive.
Excellent. John?
So I agree with everything that Anson and Romanita have said. I also think that the type of more long-term influences through childhood that I talked about in my opening are incredibly important here. So it's not just about the mindset in the moment. It's about where that comes from a child development perspective. There's some data that our shop put together about where inventors come from. In order to be an inventor, most people do that through being pretty good at math and science. But if you look at students who are scoring at the top of a third grade math test, and then just ask which of them are more likely to go on to become inventors, 20 years down the road, what you find is that students from low-income backgrounds, students who are non-white, women are much, much less likely to take that path than are white men from high-income backgrounds. It has nothing to do with the ability of the students, right? All of these students have exceptional mathematical abilities. The problem is that some are being supported in other ways that kind of give them the confidence and the skills to take on that path, and others aren't. And so if you were to increase the patenting rates of all these other groups to match those who are the most likely to go on to create patents, you would actually quadruple the amount of invention that goes on in the US every year. And so I think that, there's just a tremendous amount of untapped potential, whether that's entrepreneurship or invention or whatever else. but it's something that I believe has its roots in the experiences that children have during those formative years. It's not something that can just be conjured up. You know, it's in the same way that, you know, it's difficult to just conjure, you know, the skills to take a job into existence. You know, the same thing, you can't just conjure that kind of entrepreneurial spirit, you know, when you've gotten to the end. It needs to be something that's a focus all along the way.
Got it. Got it. And that's the challenge, right? How do we incorporate that? I mean, it's not easy, but I'm appreciative of everyone's comments. So we are almost at the end of our program. And so I'd like to give each of the panelists maybe a minute and a half to just end with a bit of inspiration. You know, can you give us some final ideas on how we can come together in San Antonio? What can we do? What is our go forward plan? Give us our call to action.
I'll be happy to go. I would say two things. One, this city has what it takes to persevere and to really grow rapidly out of this economic situation. The diversity of workforce development, training providers, and the experience of those providers is just phenomenal. The piece that the city leadership, those listening, those on the panelists, I think the piece where things can go from being great to being phenomenal is who is helping nurture and coordinate the relationships amongst those organizations. It is very easy to get into a situation where you have people that are working on the same mission competing, and they shouldn't be. And there's plenty of work to go around. And you also run into the even more negative situation of the student, the customer, the participant being confused with who's doing what. And it's about creating a smooth pathway for that frontline customer and making sure we're maximizing and people are using and leveraging the best skills they have for whatever their organization's mission is. But someone's got to be the head bottle washer, keeping that together.
Excellent. Thank you, Hanson. Very well said. Romanita, got about a minute?
Sure, Richard. I would say echo a lot of what Anson just said. We need to have the intentionality of collaboration. And I believe that is an asset we already have in San Antonio, but we need to take it to another level, and transparency and not being afraid of also exposing vulnerabilities that each of our respective organizations and institutions may have, because the end for us all should be raising the level of human capital is our biggest asset in San Antonio. And I am so proud to say as a San Antonio, we are beautiful, great, fantastic people. And the jobs where we want to recruit to San Antonio, the jobs we want to keep in San Antonio, we want our San Antonio residents to be prepared to take on those jobs. Otherwise it's off for naught. We want to see, and that needs to start not only with the adults who have been immediately impacted, but we need to look at that at our K-12 system, our investment in pre-K. So all of those systems alignments are complicated. They require funding. They require bold policy moves. I think we've done a lot of those. We've taken a lot of those critical steps, but we need to continue to hammer that. And I would add, data driven. We would need to add evidence behind that to make sure that we're being impactful where we need to and pivot as needed.
Great. Thank you, Romanita. Appreciate that. John, Dr. Friedman, we'll give you the final word.
I just think there's no more widely shared kind of tenet of belief that the opportunities available to children should not be something that depend on the circumstances of their birth. And we unfortunately have many of those disparities in this country. They've been something which have been with us for a long time, but the consequences of those differences have been growing as inequality has grown in society. And that's something that's been particularly salient over the last 11 months, but it's honestly not anything new. And so I think that it is essential to take this opportunity to not just get back to where we were before, but to really make large steps towards creating opportunity for all, towards generating shared economic prosperity. And it's something that it's not just, it's good when everyone participates. It's something that really needs broad-based participation. It's not something that the community can drive on its own. It's not something that business can drive on its own. It's not something that government can drive on its own. It's something that really needs all of those sectors, and not just, government at the, state, local, federal, but it all needs to come together to think about how we can push in this direction on every front.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And thank you to all of our panelists. You all have done fantastic. It's been an honor to join you today. And I will turn it back over to Jim. Thank you, Jim.
Whoa, what an amazing conversation. Thank you all for your insights. I hope, ladies and gentlemen, you enjoyed this conversation as well. We all have a lot of work to do. I'd like to thank Richard and the distinguished members of our panel for their insights today. Thanks again to our sponsors and to each of you here today for your time and interest. I have the results of the fundraising challenge. This challenge will extend through this Friday at 5 p.m. This morning, together with the challenge match, we raised a total of $4,718. Thank you all for your financial support, and it's not too late to give. I'd like to close this breakfast today with the final challenge. Restore Education is clearly one part of the solution to intergenerational poverty in San Antonio. We are helping our students and their families to enhance their economic opportunities and their lives, but we have more students than ever before, and we really need your help. We need your support to rise to the challenge and meet the dramatic surge in student demand for our no-cost programs. We have an immediate need for more tutoring volunteers, industry partnerships, fundraising support, and engagement with public policy leaders to better serve our students. Join us, because everyone deserves a brighter future, and the foundation for that future is a good education. In closing, here's a message from our current Restore Education volunteers.
My favorite part is that through the work together with them, I also learn about them. I also learn about myself, and we grow together.
Wanting to reach out and help somebody who is trying to help themselves and trying to make sure that they succeed.
When I discovered Restore Education, I thought, wow, okay, that's a well-organized program.
I love being able to help people, and this experience has been amazing.
It's fun, and it's rewarding, and it's really inspiring. It just makes you want to work that much harder to achieve your own goals because of what they're doing to achieve theirs.
The more the merrier. It is a lot of fun.
Come join us. Change a life. Volunteer.
Thank you, guys. Thank you all for your time, your interest, and we are adjourned.
Love the celebratory cheers back there. Congratulations, Jim.
Thank you, Romanita.